Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Some breaking news coming out of Western New York as Syracuse is expected to hire Georgia defensive backs coach Fran Brown as their next head coach of the Syracuse football team. This is a really exciting hire and kind of a intriguing job search to follow. A couple of really good candidates that they were considering: the defensive coordinator at Nebraska, Tony White, the former DC at Syracuse. Thought that would have been a really good option. They ended up going with one of the brightest up-and-coming coaches in all of college football in Fran Brown. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Fran Brown brings to the table, which is a ton, one of the best, if not the best recruiter in the entire country, but also talk about what he needs to do to get Syracuse back to where it belongs and have success with this program. Really excited to get into this one as a Western New York guy from Rochester. Fired up for this hire at Syracuse. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys. The amount of support you guys have shown for all of these head coaching searches, it means a lot. I love talking about head coaching hires and fits. Appreciate all the support you guys have shown. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And for Syracuse fans, I would not be surprised if we see Fran Brown immediately get to work in the transfer portal. We'll be trying to cover as many of these roster moves for Syracuse as we can. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. And without further ado, let's get into Fran Brown, and let's start with the background of Fran Brown and what he kind of brings to Syracuse, and then get into what he needs to do at Syracuse to have success with this program. I think one of the more appealing aspects of Fran Brown is he's from the Northeast, right? Born and raised in New Jersey. That's where he played his high school football, has coaching experience at Temple and at Rutgers before moving down to Georgia. And I think what's most important here is if Syracuse wants to get back to where they kind of belong and kind of have success with this program, you have to be able to recruit the Northeast at an extremely high level. The best players in the Northeast you want coming to Syracuse. And Fran Brown, with his experience at Temple and his experience at Rutgers, is very familiar recruiting that area, has those built-in relationships with the high school coaches. So I would expect the recruiting to make a meaningful improvement, especially in the Northeast. But in general, I think you bring in Fran Brown as a talent acquisition kind of hire. You take a look at what Fran Brown, and we can quickly go over to Fran Brown and take a look at what he's done on the recruiting trail in his short time at Georgia, right? Two recruiting cycles in the 2023 class and in this 2024 class. 3 5-stars that he was the primary recruiter on, multiple other top 100 national prospects that he was a primary or secondary recruiter on. You look at Fran Brown in his recruiting chops. He's a young coach at 40 years old. He's been one of the best in the game at recruiting young talent. And that is going to be pivotal at Syracuse. You look at Syracuse and the struggles the last couple of years. Yes, a lot of that talent has been rated in the transfer portal, and we'll talk about that. But more importantly, you have to be able to get talent to come to Syracuse. In his short amount of time at Georgia, I mean, he's been one of the best recruiters in the entire country. All that success Georgia has had on the recruiting trail, a lot of it Fran Brown has been very much involved in. The second thing I love most about it is he's coming from a program with the Georgia Bulldogs that is the epitome of a winning program, a winning culture that's been established in Athens. You look at some other assistants that have been hired away from Kirby Smart's staff, Dan Lanning at Oregon, having a ton of success. I would not be surprised in the least if Fran Brown has a ton of success at Syracuse as well, implementing what Kirby Smart has implemented in Georgia. Now, Syracuse and Georgia, very different programs in terms of resources and capabilities. But again, you can try to kind of, I guess, implement a lot of that structure and culture that works so well in Athens into Syracuse. The next thing I really like about Fran Brown is he's an elite talent developer. And you look at Georgia and the amount of draft picks, especially on the defensive side of the ball, that have gone into the NFL draft. It's one thing to recruit talented guys. The more important aspect is developing those guys into being all ACC, all American, NFL draft caliber guys. And Fran Brown has a proven track record of not only recruiting that talent, but also developing that talent to an extremely high level. For those reasons, massive, massive fan of a Fran Brown hire. And again, is the head coaching experience there? No. He's only been a defensive coordinator once in his career, and that was at Baylor. But you look at Fran Brown and what he can bring in terms of recruiting, in terms of program management. That's what you're most excited about. Yes, it's a little bit of a risky hire, a young head coach that doesn't have any head coaching experience, but the potential payout of what Fran Brown can be. I see this as Syracuse kind of getting ahead of the curve and kind of saying, this is a guy that is probably going to be an elite head coach in 10 to 15 years. Let's go bet on him now and get him before some of these other programs can. And they do that. And if you're a Syracuse fan, like, you have to be really excited about what Fran Brown can do and the potential of what Fran Brown can be as a head coach. Now, looking at some specific things that you need to do at a high level for Syracuse to be a winning program. One, you have to be able to retain your talent. It's one thing to recruit and develop, and Dino Babers at some points during his tenure did a good job of that. What was maybe the faltering aspect of this Syracuse program, especially the last couple of years, not keeping their guys within the program, getting rated in the transfer portal. Fran Brown is known around the country in terms of his relationship development. That's why he's been such a good recruiter. So if you can kind of create that culture and create those relationships within the locker room, in the program at Syracuse, maybe you can do a little bit of a better job in terms of keeping some of this top talent at Syracuse, right? You recruit a guy, you scout him out, you develop him into an all-ACC player, and then he transfers for a third and fourth year to a Ohio State or to an LSU. That hurts that program meaningfully. If you can bring in a guy that can keep those guys out of the transfer portal and within the Syracuse program, that's kind of what you want. And a guy like Fran Brown, who's known for the relationship building, is absolutely massive. And the next thing is talent evaluation. At a certain point, you have to realize what Syracuse is as a program. And there's going to be times where you can't really go head to head with a school like Ohio State or Michigan for that top 50 national prospect. So what do you have to do to have a ton of success at Syracuse? You have to do a really good job evaluating talent at the high school ranks and finding some of those diamonds in the rough. That's something that Georgia sneakily has done a really good job of. You look at some of their players that are being high impact performers, guys like Ladd McConkey, 2 stars coming out of high school that are now playing like an All-American. That's probably one of the most important attributes you can have at a school like Syracuse, is being able to find those 3 stars and those low 4 stars that maybe are getting under recruited and saying, these are guys that can make an impact at Syracuse. Let's get them into the program. Let's develop them and see what they become in 2 to 3 years. Syracuse is a developmental program. And I think Fran Brown is one of the best developmental coaches that you see across the country. Now, I think another interesting storyline here is, what does he surround himself with? One of the biggest head coaching conversations that does not get talked nearly enough about is, can you hire a staff around you that is going to help you succeed? And when Dino was having a lot of success at Syracuse, he had phenomenal coordinators like Tony White. It's one of the most important aspects of being a head coach. Fran Brown was just around the head coach that probably executes this the best in Kirby Smart. You look at what Kirby Smart surrounds himself with, it's a staff of phenomenal assistants that can recruit, that can develop, and that can call plays. And can Fran Brown replicate that kind of success at Syracuse is going to be a massive conversation. I'd be even kind of interested if he brings in a few guys from Georgia who are maybe some low-level staffers to come be one of the assistant coaches at Syracuse. And those are some interesting things that you're looking for Fran Brown taking over Syracuse. And at the end of the day, if I'm evaluating this head coach hire, I think it's awesome, because I think the upside is so high for a guy like Fran Brown. Again, you look at Fran Brown and where he would be in 10 to 15 years if he doesn't take this job at Syracuse. He was going to be a head coach somewhere at some point, because this is one of the brightest up-and-coming coaches that you see across the country. He's worked his way up from being a high school coach to a defensive backs coach to a defensive coordinator, and now he gets a shot at being a head coach of a program like Syracuse. Extremely fired up, local Northeastern guy from New Jersey, taking over one of what should be, in my mind, the biggest program in the Northeast. I mean, fire me up for this one. Again, it's maybe a little less of a flashy hire than what Dan Mullen would have been, but I think it can be a really good hire for Syracuse. Excited about it. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Again, if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll be covering what Syracuse does in the transfer portal as it opens up December 4th. And hope you guys have a good one.